"18-year-old Elizabeth Betty Hadden was described by friends as a wayward and strong-willed party girl who had a reputation for being rather flirtatious. Some newspaper reports even claimed that she was a lady of the night who enjoyed getting male attention, whereas others saw her simply as a typical young woman who was having fun. In the 1940s, Betty lived in Aberdeen, Scotland, with her mother, Kate, and 5 siblings. Betty's father, who worked at the shipyards, passed away in 1943 when Betty was just 16 years old. After leaving school, Betty worked a number of occupations, including agricultural work, fishyard work, being a kitchen maid, a scullery maid, and a waitress at a hotel. On the night of Monday, the 10th of December 1945, Betty spent the night out in Aberdeen city centre, something which she did regularly. She spent many nights trying to catch the eyes of sailors who had docked in Aberdeen Harbour, many who had travelled from afar. The Second World War had just ended by this time, and the first peaceful Christmas in 7 long years had finally arrived, and people were in very good spirits. For Betty, however, she wasn't in such fine spirits. She had been absent from her home for over a week, having last visited family 2 Fridays prior. A friend of Betty's claimed that she had stayed away from home as not to burden her widowed mother, who had the responsibility of caring for the rest of her children. Where she was lodging specifically during these few weeks is unclear, though some reports do claim that she was homeless. Late on the 10th of December 1945, Betty was seen by a number of witnesses, quote, arm in arm with 2 sailors in Castle Street, heading towards the corner of King Street. They were last seen crossing Lodge Walk. The 2 sailors with Hadden were described as being between 20 and 22 years old, with one of the men being much taller than the other. Later that night, at around 10:40 p.m, further witnesses claimed to have seen Betty with 4 female friends walking along the same Castle Street, though these accounts don't mention the 2 sailors being present. A male friend bumped into Betty at around 12:45 a.m. in the early hours of Tuesday, the 11th of December, at the corner of Gallowgate and Upper Kirkgate. And another female friend spoke with the 18-year-old at the junction of Constitution Street and Park Street at around 12:45 p.m. that afternoon, reportedly at the friend's B&B. According to her, Betty asked for a room, but they were fully booked. She then left, but nothing seemed awry. Betty was seen by a further 2 male witnesses just after 7 p.m. on the 11th of December, flirting with 3 sailors on Market Street. This was the last known sighting of Betty Hadden. According to police, a blood-curdling scream was heard across the borough of Torry, close to the Aberdeen docks, 7 hours later at approximately 2 a.m. on the 12th of December. Witnesses described the scream as female and sounding terrified, but nobody in the vicinity seemed to intervene. The residents of Torry very much kept themselves to themselves. Crime was and still is a significant issue in Torry. It is likely the residents, if they heard anything, wouldn't have wanted to get involved for their own safety. A reenactment which took place later, eerily echoing female screams through the streets. Not even a curtain was opened by a resident. Though nobody physically saw the woman who screamed, many believed it to possibly be missing teen Betty Hadden. On the 12th of December, an elderly cooper from Torry, Alexander King, who was searching for driftwood by the harbour, discovered a severed left hand and forearm lying amongst some rocks laced in seaweed, down an embankment on the foreshore of the River Dee, on the south side of the navigation channel near to St Fittick's Road. There appeared to be a piece of twine tied in a loose granny knot around the person's wrist, their fingers arched as if they were clawing at something, and the back of their hand was partially eaten away by marine life. The dismembered arm had been neatly cut with a fine-toothed saw and a knife, confirming suspicions that a murder had occurred. Rumours circulated in the city that the arm may have been thrown from a warship, but the neat cut debunked this theory. Alexander rushed to the nearest phone box and contacted the police. It didn't take long for authorities to identify the remains as having belonged to Betty Hadden. Only 4 hours, in fact, as there were only a small number of missing people in Aberdeen at the time. The hand also had nicotine stains on her fingers, with Betty being a smoker, and her fingerprints were also taken, which matched a police profile. Betty had one minor offence on her criminal record for shoplifting. It is unclear how Betty met her demise, though it was determined by experts that she was alive around 14 hours prior to her arm being recovered from the River Dee. Following the grisly discovery, police searched across Aberdeen for Betty Hadden, knocking on doors and visiting local hospitals, scouring riverbanks, harbours and various beaches, but no further trace of her was found. Police couldn't say with certainty whether Betty's arm washed ashore from the sea or had been dumped in the River Dee and floated downstream. During their inquiries, police discovered that one of Betty's friends had disappeared on the 9th of December and suspected that something sinister had happened to both women, possibly by the same person. However, the friend was found alive and well 11 days later in Perth. Authorities questioned a number of crew members on all of the boats that docked and departed from the city harbour at the time of Betty's murder, but unfortunately nothing of significance was discovered. How did Betty come to be dismembered, and by who? A number of suspects were questioned by police at the time, with one even being the subject of a few weeks of surveillance, but nobody could definitively be linked to the brutal crime. Nobody has ever been charged in relation to Betty's murder. Efforts to find out what happened that night to the 18-year-old proved to be difficult, and despite investigating extensively, the events that occurred before, during and after Betty's death remains a mystery. According to an officer who worked on the case, it is likely that Betty was assaulted by a local man before she was murdered and discarded in either the River Dee or the sea. It was the officer's belief that perhaps Betty's remains were stored in a trunk of some kind, though her arm did not fit and was subsequently tossed into the ocean. There is also the possibility that Betty's remains were scattered across Aberdeenshire, perhaps in other waterways or in wooded areas. However, there is no evidence to support this theory, as the remainder of Betty's remains have never been found. For a number of years, Betty's arm was kept in a jar by medical students at Aberdeen Marischal College's Anatomy Museum as a macabre attraction. The arm was eventually thrown out when the college itself relocated. After 75 years, the murder of Betty Hadden remains unsolved. Was she murdered by a sailor? And if so, why? Did she perhaps reject their advances, which then resulted in them lashing out? If so, why did they use such brutality? No evidence from this case has been preserved, meaning that we will most likely never know the identity of Betty's killer.